All right, so like I said, we're going to be just going through, we're going to be using handouts for the next 5, 6, 7 weeks. Sorry, I have teenagers. We're going to be doing handouts like this because the book goes and does some of the 10 Commandments well, but this is material that I already have for a high school class where we go through kind of a moral theology light class. And so this is, we're going to be using these. We're going to be going through this pretty quick. We're going to be just going through not in a lot of detail. So you're welcome to, go through this more on your own. And if you have questions about stuff, let me know. But basically, what we're going to be doing for the next 5-6 weeks or so is just going through the 10 Commandments. Okay. The 10 Commandments are essentially our building blocks. They're the foundation of morality. What we've been doing is going through, so in the book, we kind of finished that first section and there was that big kind of closing section. That first section that we looked at was theology, right? Here's what we believe and here's why we believe it. But we can believe all the things and that's great, but we have to act like it, right? We have to act in a certain way because we believe in all of the stuff that we've been looking through up until now. And the 10 Commandments are basically kind of our, like I said, our building blocks as to how do we behave? We all know kind of broadly the story that Moses went up on a mountain and got the 10 Commandments, and they were written by God and given to him by God, and those still form the moral basis, even though they were given, 4,000 or 6,000 years ago, something like that, to the Jewish people. They still form the basis of Christianity. So we're going to be going through these 10 Commandments for the next period of time here in this class. So the first commandment, we're going to have kind of 2 classes about these. And the way that I've set these classes up is we're going to look at the positive moral law, and then we'll look at the negative moral law. So the positive law, how are we supposed to act? What do we do positively, right? What are we actually supposed to do? And then on the negative side, what are we not supposed to do, right? So the first commandment, at the top of each one, we'll go through what it says in Scripture. I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. Okay, that's basically what it is. And then he goes into some detail. The Lord goes into some more detail. You shall not make for yourself a graven image, nor any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. Right? He's covering all his bases. Don't look at anyone else other than me. I am God. Okay. So the first commandment basically says, and again, we're going to go quickly through these bullet points. If you get lost, holler, let me know. But again, when I teach this in high school, we just go through one of these classes a day. So we're going through like 5 of these today. First commandment means that followers must worship and adore God alone because God is alone, right? There's no one like him. The Catechism explains that this prohibits idolatry, providing examples of forbidden practices such as the worship of any creature, also demons. Morning, Caleb. Morning, sir. We got plenty of space. Have a seat. Power, pleasure, race, ancestors, the state, money. Catechism says you can't look at any of this stuff. We're just going through handouts today, and we will be for the next 5 or 6 weeks or so.
Thank you, sir.
We are right. We just started, we're right there.
Thank you, sir.
You bet. Okay, so the God alone are we to worship, and that's it. Okay. And then the Catechism says, hey, there's 3 theological virtues that we need to look at. There's faith, hope, and charity. We can sin against the first commandment if we sin against faith, hope, and charity, and that's what we're going to be looking at towards the end of this class. There's also differences in the Old Testament and the New Testament. In the Old Testament, they were very literal, and we're going to see this throughout, how there was a great sense of literality, of literalness, of graven images. In the Old Testament, there was no sense of who God was, right? We knew that God existed, bless you. We knew that God existed, but we didn't really have any image of him, right? It wasn't until Jesus came where we have, oh, Jesus made flesh and blood, like he's real. And so the first commandment was very careful. It was seen as presumptuous and violating the first commandment to make any sort of figure to him. So you're not going to see any sort of depiction of God, whether it's in art or even in writing. It was so carefully guarded that even depictions of other figures like Abraham and Moses were prohibited. You don't make any and they would consider these graven images of holy people. But in the New Testament, we see this complete reversal. We see a flurry of images depicting God, depicting Jesus. And there were a lot of controversies about this in the early church. We were still at this time trying to wrestle through, like, is it okay to make images of Jesus? Is it not? In the 8th century, there were heated arguments, fistfights actually, in councils about whether or not it was okay to have images of Jesus. Second Council of Nicaea, 787, the Ecumenical Council determined that veneration of icons, images, and statues was not in violation of the commandment, and says, whoever venerates an image venerates the person portrayed in it. Because there was this sense that if you're praying to an image, kind of like how we have pictures of Our Lady of Guadalupe or statues today, there was this sense that, oh, maybe you're worshiping these idols. Well, and pagan idol worship was still very real at this time. And so people were kind of allergic to this, like, ooh, we can't go too far, right? And so they very clearly said, and one of the reasons they said was, hey, Jesus came down himself and he was made physical in form. Therefore, and we venerated him, we worshiped him when he was here, then therefore we can venerate images as well. The Catechism posits that God gave permission for images that symbolize Christian salvation, like the Ark of the Covenant, the cherubim, angels, things like that. Okay, so it is allowed, but and it's not as difficult for us today, right? We are not as apt to worship idols as some of our ancestors were in the 700s, and so it's not as much of a problem today. But we need to make sure that we're not, right? Whenever we pray to an image, we need to make sure that we're not worshiping that image, right? We're always worshiping the person behind it and the power of God behind it. Examples of violation of this commandment. So here's some examples of negative. Idolatry, right? Idolatry, considered by itself, is the greatest of mortal sins. The commandments, by the way, go in order of importance, right? The first one is the first one because it's the first one, it's the most important. By definition, idolatry is an inroad on God's sovereignty. It's not just about having an idol, but it's setting anything up, any earthly thing, whether it's an idol made of wood or whether it's another person, right? Are we adoring something else more than God? God deserves the highest place of honor in our hearts, okay? How do we see this today most commonly? Like, because you might be thinking, well, of course, I'm not going to set up an idol in my room. I'm not going to worship an idol. No, probably not. But we see this in especially in some cultures today, especially here in the Southwest, especially we just passed November 2nd, like Dia de los Muertos, where there's this strong tendency to pray to our ancestors, right? Especially in some of these celebrations. We need to be very careful that we are not, and we talked about this in the class around this time, we need to be very careful that we're not praying to our ancestors, right? And setting them up as gods or setting them up as more than they are. We need to make sure that we are worshiping God alone, right? Secondarily, it's most common in the West in terms of placing more importance on creatures and things compared to God, whether career or people or amusements, right? So God, putting it plainly, God deserves the place of primacy in our hearts, the most important place in our hearts. And now we're going to start to get into sins against faith, hope, and charity. So sins against faith, doubt. We've talked a lot about this already in this semester, right? Since September. It's not wrong to have doubts. It's okay to be confused. It's okay to question things. But voluntary doubt, right? It's saying, yeah, I just don't want to believe. That's where we get into trouble. Involuntary doubt refers to hesitation in believing, difficulty in overcoming objections. That's fine. But if we're stuck in doubt on purpose, like, yeah, I don't really understand it and I don't care, yeah, that's where we can have a problem, right? Incredulity, so on the back of that first page, incredulity, the neglect of revealed truth or the willful refusal to assent to it, right? Or heresy, the obstinate post-baptismal denial of some truth, which must be believed with divine and Catholic faith, or an obstinate doubt concerning the same. So the Trinity, for instance. Yeah, I just don't understand it. And if you said, hey, Andrew, I don't understand the Trinity, I'd be like, yeah, cool, I don't either. Yeah, I just don't want to believe it because I don't understand it. That's where we would get into incredulity. That's where we would get into kind of this obstinate refusal. And this is where we would say, yeah, faith is hard. We just have to accept some things on faith. I don't understand how quantum physics works. Doesn't mean that I don't accept that it is true. doesn't mean that I don't accept that it's real, right? So incredulity and heresy are pretty much there. Apostasy would be a total repudiation of the Catholic faith, meaning I don't want anything to do with it. Hopefully we're not there, right? Hopefully we're on the other side of that. Schism, refusal of submission to the Roman pontiff or the Catholic Church as a whole. Okay, so those would be sins against faith. And then we have sins against hope. Hope is the virtue by which we believe that if we do what we're supposed to do, then we're going to attain salvation. And despair would be one of those sins. I just can't do it. I am a sinner. I'm so awful. I can't make it to heaven no matter what. No, we have to always believe that we can make it to heaven no matter what. And then on the other side of despair, right, we can go too far the other way, presumption. Yeah, I can go ahead and sin. I can do whatever I want. I can live a rotten life. It doesn't matter. I'll be saved. No, that doesn't work that way either. Okay, so despair and presumption are kind of opposite ends of the same thing, right? That's a sin against hope. All right, let's go ahead and go into the next page, which is examples of violation against the commandment, and then this is essentially all violations against charity, right? So all of these we're looking on this page are violations against the virtue of charity. So indifference, and again, we're going to go through this pretty quickly. So stop me if you have questions or if things aren't making sense, okay? But indifference means, doesn't matter, right? You can believe what you want to believe. I'll believe what I want to believe, right? Doesn't really matter. We have to be strong in believing that, hey, God has given us these truths and we must maintain them. Indifference of religion is the false notion that most or all religions are essentially the same and none contains more truth than another. This is a big problem in our world today, right? Especially where we have phrases like, well, that's my truth. Well, you can believe your truth, I can believe my truth, and everything is fine. There is a truth, right? And this is what we're going through today. Ingratitude is another one. Ingratitude, we always have to be grateful. I had a priest tell me once that if we lose the sense of gratitude, that's when our faith is really going to start to fall apart really fast. Gratitude is really, out of all of these, if we can foster a sense of gratitude, even about the small things, then we're going to be fine. I remember I was going through a pretty rough patch in my life about 10, 12 years ago, and it was, all right, business wasn't going well, relationships weren't going well. Like I was going through internal struggles on my own, and I had a friend who was like, find gratitude. I was like, everything is bad. I can't find gratitude. He's like, find gratitude. There's something you can be grateful for right now today. I woke up and I was like, I woke up under a roof today, right? I woke up with food. Okay, start there, right? And then we can move on from that. If you can start with gratitude, then you're going to be good with everything else. Ingratitude can demolish our relationship with God. Okay, so be grateful. Understand that everything good in our lives comes from Him. Lukewarmness. Lukewarmness is essentially like laziness. It's like spiritual laziness, right? I don't really want, and this is closely related to the next one, which is called acedia. Lukewarmness is the sense that I don't really care. I don't really care about the truths of the faith. I don't really care. We need to foster a love of understanding about what our faith is. And then acedia is sorrow about spiritual good. When sometimes like, well, you should say a rosary. You should say your morning prayers. You should say your evening prayers. I'm really tired. I don't want to. Struggle with that every day, right? So you're not alone if that's something that you're struggling with. I have it too. And that's a really strong temptation that we have. We are tired. There's a lot going on in our lives. But again, putting God first, right? You wake up in the morning and our first thought should be, after you kind of realize where you were last night, I'm joking. Our first thought should be gratitude, right? Waking up saying prayers. Okay, thank you for this day. And going to bed saying, thank you for this day. Keep me through the night, right? So acedia. And then finally, hatred of God. Hopefully we don't get there, right? But it can happen where, again, bad things happen in our life and we're like, why would you let this happen to me? How do we fix that? Gratitude. It's always gratitude. So gratitude is going to be how we're going to keep that virtue of charity going in our lives all the time. Other offenses against the first commandment that aren't specifically about faith, hope, and charity. Divination and magic. We really shouldn't be diving into that stuff. Consulting horoscopes, right? Is it you might be thinking like going and looking at the horoscope online, right? The daily horoscope app or something, not a big deal, but it's going to start to tell you like, hey, that there are other powers at play, like the, Saturn is rising and right, all this stuff. Maybe it's laughable, fine. But maybe it's also going to start to eat away a little bit at this sense that God is in control of all things, right? We can't diminish this idea that God is in control, that we're here on this earth because of God's goodness. And it's not because of where the planets are. Astrology, palm reading, interpretation of omens and lots, phenomena of clairvoyance, recourse to mediums, right? As Catholics, we are not allowed to go to palm readers. We're not allowed to go to fortune tellers. We're not. Well, it's just like at a carnival. It's just for fun. Yeah, don't go. Don't make that step, because then you're going to start thinking like, oh, the palm reader told me this. Okay, well then I got to go. Then we're going to start to think that, our destiny is set by some other power other than God, right? It's a very easy slippery slope for us to go into. So never play with that stuff. Tempting God. God is tempted explicitly when something is demanded of him, or when something is done or omitted for the actual purpose of ascertaining the extent of God's love, power, or wisdom. So an example of this would be, we're going through a hard time, right? And this is always when we're having an emotional problem. And I'm not saying that emotions are bad. Emotions are good. They tell us something about what's going on in our intellect, right? That something's wrong or something is good. But a lot of times we use our emotion and we start to bargain with God. Well, God, if you really love me, then, right, we're going to start to play with and treat God as like this, having this negotiation, right? We can't do that, right? Remember, God is holding us in our hands from all eternity. He knows exactly where we're supposed to be at any given moment and what we're supposed to do, and he has a plan for us. Even the hardest things that we go through in life, right? Where I was 12 years ago, where it was like everything is falling apart. He had a plan, right? So to explicitly tempt God is always a grave sin. It's not wrong to be like, to pray for things. God, please help me, right? That's not tempting God. That's not making a bargain with God. But to try to bargain with him is not really good. Okay. Sacrilege. Sacrilege is the violation or injurious treatment of a sacred object, a site, or a person, right? So this is less about God and more about the things and the people that are involved with God. So going into a church and using a church for a non-sacred reason, right? This could be even being disrespectful in a church. That would be considered sacrilege. Being irreverent about saints, being irreverent about priests, right? As you grow in your faith and as you get more involved with the parish, you're probably going to make friends with the priests, right? They're going to be friends of yours. Same with the sisters, right? And that's perfectly fine, right? I went to high school with guys who are now priests, and I know all their dirty laundry, which is funny, because God makes use of people who are just like you and me to become, priests of his. And it doesn't mean that you can't have fun, right? My friend Nick, who's now a priest, like I still have fun with him. We still talk about old times that we've had. But when I'm talking with him as a priest, right, when he's up on the altar, okay, now there's a difference, right? It'd be like if you have a friend who now becomes the president of the United States, you'd be like, really? That guy's the president? But when you go up to him and you're in the White House, like there's a certain respect that you have, okay? To mock someone because they're a priest, to mock someone because they're a religious sister, that would be a sin against the first commandment as well, okay? Again, using a church, using a sacred place, or using sacred things and mocking them or using them. There was a few years back, I'm not one of those people who is like the trad version, the Catholic version of cancel culture. I don't like canceling people. I don't like this whole like, I will never shop at XYZ place. To me, that's kind of pointless. But I do make a few exceptions. Sabrina Carpenter, pop singer, right? She did a music video, and she got permission to do this by a local priest, but she did a music video, and sorry if this is scandalous, but she basically did a striptease on an altar for the music video. That's a pretty strong example of sacrilege, right? You can't do that. And I have prohibited my kids from ever listening to Sabrina Carpenter. Like, no, she is a person who's done this. Even if she didn't know what she was doing, and I hope she didn't, she still committed a sacrilege on an altar. And this should be the most important thing for us, right? This is where the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ is comes down from heaven every day. No, so that'd be an example of sacrilege. And as Catholics, we need to take a very strong stance on that, right? We should have a love for holy things, and we shouldn't be okay with the modern world that tends to, yeah, it's fun. You're just too hung up on old traditions. Yeah, I am. Yeah, and we should be able to say, yes, I am hung up on those because it is important to me, and I have a love for these things. Simony, buying or selling of something spiritual or closely related with the spiritual. Comes from a guy, Simon, who wanted to buy from the apostles. He offered the apostles hey, let me do the miracles like you guys do, and I'll buy it from you. But in our sense, obviously, we wouldn't hopefully do that. But you can't pay for anything, right? You can't offer money to a priest in order to say mass for you. Now, if you ask a priest to say mass for you, obviously priests are poor. Out of gratitude, you can give him some cash, but he is not ever allowed to say, yeah, I'll do this for, Luke, I'll say mass for you, but hey, it's $50. He's not allowed to do that. Can't do that, right? The mass is not for sale. Sacraments are not for sale. Blessings are not for sale. It can't be done, okay? Cults. Let's not join cults. Luke said he's going to start one. Don't do it, okay? No, I don't think we have an issue with cults, but we can get into cults of personality, right? Obviously, we're not going to go, join the Branch Davidians and David Koresh and all that kind of stuff. Dated reference, I know, but where we can get into trouble is thinking that I only belong to this sect of Catholicism. We are being baptized and becoming Catholic. You're not becoming baptized and becoming an SSPX Catholic. Yes, you're here at an SSPX chapel. You're not an SSPX Catholic. There's no such thing, right? So some examples. Remember, you're Catholic. You're not fill in the blank Catholic here. Beware of attaching yourself too strongly to any one pastor, priest, religious order, or religious affiliation. This is one of the reasons why SSPX priests are transferred pretty often, is to blast away that kind of cult of personality. Well, I only go to confession to Father Bushman. I only go to mass to Father McFarland. No, that's a problem, right? It doesn't mean that, yes, you have a certain affinity with one of the priests, fine, right? We all do. You pick out one of the priests as your spiritual director, fine. And that's a good thing, right? We can talk about that more later. But we shouldn't attach ourselves too strongly to any one person. That's kind of that cult of personality. So some examples. I only listen to Father Ripperger on YouTube for all of my advice. Well, now you're a Father Ripperger Catholic. That's not Catholic. I only go to an SSPX chapel for my Sunday obligation, right? We may feel more at home in an SSPX chapel, and that's great. And you're here in catechism at an SSPX chapel, fine. But it's not, right? Let's be careful about that. I only listen to Father Signs. He's down the road at St. Catherine of Siena, great priest also. I only listen to him for my spiritual guidance, not any other priest. That's a problem. Let's not hold on too tightly to any one priest, any one person. Don't just listen to me, right? There are other people out there than just the people who you're listening to, okay? That's what I mean when I talk about cult of personality. Questions about that? Make sense so far? Okay. Sins against the second commandment. We're not going to get through all these today. We'll try. Second commandment, don't take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Positive aspects. What does this commandment tell us to do? To honor the name of God. For those of you who are men and who are about to be baptized, I would highly recommend you join the Holy Name Society. It's basically the men's group here in the parish. And it's called the Holy Name Society because its primary function is our own sanctification, right? The sanctification of the individuals. And how do we do this? By keeping the Lord's name holy. It's a very simple thing. Really, that's all you guys do? That's the primary thing we do, is keeping the Lord's name holy. And then from there, everything else flows. And it seems like a very, very simple thing. But we keep the name of the Lord holy. How do we honor the name of God? By using it in prayer with devotion, by using it with love and respect. I'm on those bullet points there. Calling upon the name and the titles of God and the saints as we go about our day. Again, speaking about these things with respect. By using the quote-unquote greatest name on heaven and earth, the holy name of Jesus. We shouldn't be afraid to call upon the name of Jesus in our daily life and our prayers. there are these little prayers. They're called ejaculations, these little tiny prayers that we can use throughout the day. And we'll talk about those more when we kind of get into the spirituality of things. Say the name of Jesus often throughout the day. He'll call upon his name, right? And use it with love and respect. My Jesus, I'm having a hard day. Please help me. My Jesus, I love you, right? We can make countless prayers throughout the day just by that, right? And it's a name that was given to us. It was given to us by heaven itself. Let's use it, right? Let's use it with kindness, with love, and with respect. Negative aspect. What does the second commandment tell us not to do? We can't use the name of God or of holy things, but primarily of God, in vain, meaning lightly or in jest or in anger. Okay. The Council of Trent says, "You shall not take the name of thy God in vain," which seems to assign the reason why this crime is so wicked and heinous, namely that it derogates from the majesty of him whom we profess to recognize as our Lord and God. So blasphemy. Blasphemy, what is that? Speaking against God in a contemptuous, scornful, or abusive manner. So serious, contemptuous ridicule of the saints, sacred objects, or persons consecrated to God is also blasphemous. We kind of talked about this already with sacrilege, where sacrilege is more about against people and things. Blasphemy is about the names of things. So Forrest Gump, if you've seen the movie, right? Lieutenant Dan out there in the storm, and he's screaming at God, "Is that all you got?" Blasphemy, right? We shouldn't be speaking, we shouldn't be yelling at God in this way. So let's talk about some of these things. Blasphemy light, that's my term that I put in here, so it's not a church term, but I call it the OMG habit, or the oh my God habit. Using the name of God or the saints in an offhanded way or an expression of surprise or anger. The intent is the difference. So when we're saying, oh my God, help me, perfectly good, right? My Jesus, help me, perfectly good. If we get scared and we go, oh my God, let's be careful about that, right? That's what I call blasphemy light. It's not great. It's generally venially sinful, generally. And this is where I will say, in some other cultures, it's perfectly fine. In Spanish-speaking cultures, to say Dios mío is perfectly okay and perfectly normal. This is where some of these things can get tricky according to, kind of cultural norms. Here in the U.S., if you start running around, especially in Catholic circles, and you're saying, oh my God, a lot, people are going to look at you kind of weird. So let's stay away from that. Cursing is sometimes shorthand for using all bad language, right? But cursing specifically is to call down evil from God, right? So to say God damn you is always a problem, is always bad, and generally always mortally sinful. It's a big deal. Why? Because God listens. Now, I'm not saying that it's actually going to happen, right? If you say God damn you to someone, does that mean that they're damned? No. But our words have power, not just here on earth, but in heaven as well. If we think about it this way, if Chris is like, hey, Andrew, I've got a really tough day. Can you pray for me? And I pray for him. Hopefully God's going to hear my prayers, and that's going to be helping Chris. But if I use the name of God to try to harm Chris, right? Let's take that seriously. Our words have power, and so let's not use those things. So to say God damn you to someone, it's real, and it's a serious thing. And we need to be very, very careful about that, especially if we are a father or a mother and we're saying that to our children, right? That's a real, real problem. If we stub our toe and we slip and we say, God damn it, that's generally venial. But again, let's try to get out of that habit. Let's try to pull out the weeds of that habit as much as possible. Telling someone go to hell is another example. If we're saying it in anger and we say it because we actually mean it, that's a curse. And we really, that could be mortally sinful. So be careful. God gave us words, they're powerful, okay? So let's be careful of that. Taking false vows or oaths. False oaths is swearing to the performance of anything and not intending to fulfill it, or having had the intention to neglect its performance, right? So an oath is like, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, right? And if you don't do that, right, that's perjury. But I take an oath to do something, especially if it's done before God and we break it, that's a violation of the second commandment. Perjury, we just talked about that, same sort of thing. Foul and vulgar language, again, this is mostly for high school kids that I have in here. Again, our words have power, right? Let's try to, I remember one time when I was a young adult, went to confession one time, and I was like, okay, but Father, is it really wrong to just use crass language? Is it really a sin? And he's like, depending on the situation, is maybe not a sin, but God gave us the power of speech. God gave us the ability to do wonderful, beautiful things with our language and with our speech and with our voices. Let's try to stick to the good side of that, and let's not try to denigrate ourselves, right? We live in a society where, you watch a stand-up comedian and every other word is a cuss word. Why? It doesn't need to be that way, right? God gave us the ability to speak. Let's do it better. And the last line I have in there, again, for the high school kids, is be better. Let's try to do better. Let's not try to go down into that. All right, let's real briefly go through the Lord's Day, Commandment 3, and then we'll do Commandment 4 next time. Observe the Lord's Day. You'll notice in this commandment, it doesn't say that we have to go to Mass on Sundays and holy days. It just says, keep holy the Lord's Day. Later on, we're going to look at the precepts of the church, which are the New Testament commandments, so to speak. And they tell you, hey, you have to go to Mass. How do we keep the Lord's Day holy? Go to Mass. But in the Old Testament, it was keep the Lord's Day holy. And this comes from Genesis. God created everything. He had the 6 days to create everything. And it says on the seventh day, he rested. And he wants us to do the same. And God is good, right? God isn't just a taskmaster. He wants us to relax. He wants us to take a minute so that we can, and again, it's for our own benefit. And he says, hey, but on that day when you're relaxing, keep your mind on me. And that's all we're supposed to do on Sunday. Keep your eye on God. Let's try to keep this day, today, dedicated to holy things as best as possible. It doesn't mean that you can't go watch the Chiefs game or the Jets game or whatever today. It doesn't mean that you can't go and hang out and go bowling and watch a movie with your family. Of course, all good things. It doesn't mean that you have to be a monk on Sundays. But it means keep your eye towards it. That's why we start the day out with Mass. And it means that we shouldn't be working, right? Again, we should be keeping our mind towards spiritual things and towards a little bit of leisure, a little bit of recreation. And so that's why the church is like, hey, don't do any of these things. Don't go to work on a Sunday. We shouldn't be treating a Sunday like it's any other day, because it's not. This is a day dedicated to God. It's a sanctified day. It's a holy day dedicated to God. Okay? So how do we keep the Lord's Day? Bold stuff there on the bottom. Our first priority is to worship God by participating at Holy Mass. So we are supposed to go to Mass on Sundays. Thank you very much. That's supposed to be our main focus, is to go to Mass. If we can, or if we can't, if there's one reason or another why we can't go, then we're allowed to skip. But we need to do the best we can. All right, let's pause there. We'll pick this up a little bit next time. Okay?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We're good. Good. We'll see you next week then. Okay?
Oh, wait, next week isn't next week, right?
Let's go ahead and meet if you're going to be in town. If you're going to be around.
I believe so. I may be at a parish for a mass with some friends at St. Anne's for that week.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I can also reschedule that too.
Okay. Well, whatever works.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
And really, I can reschedule. That's not an issue.
Okay.